Welcome. I'm Alex Slosby, Chief Growth Officer here at InnoLead, and I'm very excited to have you join us today for our webcast, Your Random Acts of Innovation Aren't Working, with Anna Veatch, Managing Director at Innosight, and Dr. Erez Agmoni, Global Head of Innovation at Maersk. We'll get started in just a minute, but while everyone's settling in, please do share in the chat where you're coming in from. We always like to see this global reach that we tend to have for these webcasts, and indeed, the three of us are a bit distributed. Anna, you want to share where you're coming in from?
I'm currently on the road in Dallas, so you see a hotel backdrop behind me. We were talking about this beforehand, a high of 70, so I'm in the right place, moving to great weather as I'm on the road.
That's nice. I'm here outside of Boston, where again this time of year it's a little bit chilly, as customarily is the case. Erez, where are you?
I just arrived from Boston, actually. I was there earlier this morning and the last few days, and I landed back in New Jersey, where I'm based. I'm actually the Innovation Center, which is in Jersey City. You can see Manhattan here in the back, and my screen behind me with some kind of cool stuff that's running on it, but we'll keep it for another time, what is on it.
Yeah, I was going to say it's very cool because you've got global out your window and then innovation behind you. So
Yeah.
very, very cool. Again, let me welcome everybody. Again, thanks so much for joining. I'm Alex Slosby, Chief Growth Officer here at InnoLead, and really excited to welcome you to our webcast, Your Random Acts of Innovation Aren't Working, with Anna Veatch, Managing Director at Innosight, and Dr. Erez Agmoni, Global Head of Innovation at Maersk. So again, if you're just coming in, please share in the chat where you're coming in from. It'd be great to see that. And let's get started. We've got some great content to go through and a great conversation that Anna's going to have with Erez. As is the case for us usually, today's webcast is being recorded, and we'll share both the replay and the slides after the fact. As we go, please take advantage of Zoom's Q&A and chat features to share questions and comments with us. We'll be monitoring those as we go and taking those questions and comments during the webcast, and then also at the end of the initial portion. And then also we're going to host an Ask Us Anything call in about a week where Anna and Erez will be there. We'll have it as a Zoom meeting rather than a webinar, and can have a great discussion about any of the topics here, and we'll share that link in the chat. So let's get started. Let me begin by introducing Anna. Anna is a Managing Director at Innosight, where she co-leads the industrial practice with a focus on transportation and logistics. She helps senior leaders and management teams develop future-oriented strategies for growth and build innovation capabilities to accelerate those opportunities. Everyone, thanks again for joining. Anna, the floor is yours.
Great. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. We'll do just a little bit of setup, and then we'll dive into a conversation. So let's see, get myself queued up here. There we go. So first of all, as Alex said, the topic, your random acts of innovation aren't working. So this is the discussion on building an innovation system. But wanted to start with a little bit of why are we here in the first place? What brings us together for the importance of this topic? So one, I love this slide. So this is a slide over the last century of technology and solution adoption curves. And it's a stark reminder to me that the world is constantly changing. And each of these lines, some of them have steeper adoption, some of them have slower adoption, but all of them radically changed day-to-day lives and had ripple effects across ecosystems. We tend to overestimate the change in the short term, kind of pulling on some wisdom that's out there, and underestimate the change in the long term. So this is the kind of graph that I like have pasted above my desk to remind myself that we're constantly in an environment where we need to be thinking about the next thing and how to evolve. Now, the problem is that we're not particularly good at this. This is a chart of the average lifespan of an S&P 500 company. And you can see a trend that's quite disturbing here, which is that it's decreasing. So as we think about it, one of the things that corporations struggle with is, what do we do about that degree of change? How do we react to that level of disruption? And there's a real need. To me, this is the case for change. There's a real need for us to be doing things differently to start to reverse this trend. One of the other things that's not obvious here on this page, but that I find interesting about the S&P 500 is where value is concentrating. So The top 5 players on the S&P 500 at the moment, they change order sometimes a little bit, but generally Microsoft, Apple, Amazon, NVIDIA, and Alphabet. And those 5 companies represent over 20% of the value of the S&P 500. So there's also an understanding of where is value concentrating and what are the types of changes that are starting to accumulate value. So for me, these 2 slides tend to be very compelling on why is innovation so important and why is the successful pursuit of innovation within corporations so crucial. So to start with, with that case for change established, thought it'd be useful to define innovation. So we define innovation as something different that creates value. I'll say sometimes the something different is easier than the creates value part. So it's not just doing things that are different, but really making sure they add up to the value addition for the enterprise. And this thing about different is, it's different from the existing core business that you have, which is what makes it hard. And I think I might be preaching to the choir here, but as you're bringing these things that are different to your company, you're really thinking about kind of going up against the existing processes, the existing way of doing things, and you need to find new ways to bring those ideas to life. And so we want to dive into how to do that. Now, people see this all the time, and I think this importance is recognized, but folks run into common failure modes. So when we look at, there's a lot of good activity that goes on that sometimes hits roadblocks. So wanted to give just a couple of those examples. Develop an innovation strategy, a really, really good idea. And we wouldn't discourage any of these, just want to expand upon it. But sometimes these hit roadblocks because they're not in alignment with the enterprise strategy. So making sure that there's cohesion in what's being pursued. Run a hackathon. Again, another good example of something, but if you don't have the right governance, sometimes these ideas just sit there. So how do you make sure that the activity you're doing leads to something? Create an innovation fund. Also really important, but often comes under pressure to reallocate that money back to the core business, especially as business environments get more challenging. You can see a theme here. Each of these kind of runs up against roadblocks. We'll highlight just a few more. Building an innovation team, but without the right governance can come into conflict with how the core is trying to use those resources or direct folks. Lean startup sprints sometimes have trouble finding a home after they're pursued. A culture of innovation is incredibly important, but if you encourage people to adopt new behaviors before changing some of the structure around them, in some ways you're asking them to kind of become a martyr. How are they pursuing something, but they're going against the grain of what exists? And so you have to encourage more than behaviors. You have to support them with the whole system around them. And finally, appointing a chief innovation officer, crucial. That needs to be followed with things like clarity on the role and how it fits in with the overall business. So again, all of these things, in fact, many of these things we'd encourage. The thing that we would say leads to things getting stuck is when these are done in a way that's a one-off. So each of these as a standalone will run into problems. You need to bring a holistic view to the set of things that you're putting in place. One of the things that we talk a lot about is the importance then behind that, to counter this, of an innovation system. So really creating a mutually reinforcing set of components that protect and encourage innovation to be incubated and scaled, and really kind of lean into the longevity as opposed to something that has a shorter lifespan. So a couple things that I want to highlight here just on this is, the components and how we think about the innovation system. First of all, in the middle is just being clear about the performance that you're trying to deliver. So what are the objectives and what are you trying to get from the innovation initiatives that you're putting in place? With that in mind, you then want to set the strategic priorities. When we think about the idea of innovation as something different, that's a wide lens. It can include so many different avenues or different projects and priorities. So within that, getting really clear about what are the set of priorities that are important to a company to pursue with their innovation strategy, and making sure that's aligned with the overall enterprise strategy and the overall growth trajectory of the company. Next, we have innovation pathways. We talked about, as you're bringing these new ideas, they'll often conflict with the traditional new product development processes. So, Historically, new products that are launched, there's a level of certainty. They're going into markets that are understood. They're often serving the customers that you already are providing for. With new ideas, a lot of those variables start to change, and there's a lot of uncertainty introduced. And so because of that, you need a more agile approach. You need ways to test, learn, iterate rapidly, and even kill ideas at a higher rate that you find out aren't going to lead to the value that you want. And so thinking about new ways to take these ideas to life is really important, and setting up the process around that. The next piece is around portfolio governance. And this is about saying, as we're doing these activities, how do we start to track that and have one view of the truth and say, how are things going? How are we progressing against the priorities that we established? And where do we need to pivot? Where do we need to lean more into? Where do we need to pull back from? And how do we decide to start and stop new projects against that? And then finally, people and culture. When we think about making sure that we have the right folks to bring into innovation teams, sometimes that's pulling from the capabilities that we already have depth in. Sometimes it's complementing with new capabilities where we have gaps. And then thinking about what are the behaviors that we want to institute that might be in contrast to the core business. But again, doing that in a way that it's supported by these many other components so that those can thrive. So sort of introduce the case for change, how we define innovation, why innovation efforts often get stuck, and then this idea of the holistic system. So want to turn this to the group a little bit and ask, if you were going to look at your own company and characterize where you're at, how would you characterize where you're at in this journey of building up and maturing your innovation systems? So we'll give people a little bit to put in. I already see some answers pinging in, so curious to see the spread that we see around here.
And I think if we phrased it as aspiration, you'd have everybody on the right end of the spectrum, but then there's unfortunately the cold splash of reality, which quite often puts us on the left end of the spectrum. So let's take another moment or so. Please keep the results coming in. Let's try to get to at least 90% or more. Again, how do you characterize your organization? Ad hoc, uncoordinated, getting started, have pieces in place, starting to hit our stride, or a mature innovation system? Really curious to see how many folks actually have that. And you could certainly feel free to share, in the chat, any further thoughts about it, why you're in one of these categories versus another. And just a reminder as well, please feel free to share any questions and comments in the chat, and also using the Q&A feature. So let's give it another few seconds. If you haven't voted, please do.
Great. So I think these are visible to all now.
Yes.
Okay, so we're seeing a nice bell curve here. Actually kind of encouraged by a lot of folks feeling like you have made some progress, have pieces in place, but work to do, but feeling at least some confidence about, we're moving in the right direction. We're starting to establish, but not a ton of folks who would say, hey, starting to hit our stride or mature innovation system. So definitely room for growth. And then about 30% thinking about this ad hoc or just getting started kind of a little bit earlier in that process. And so some of those slides on some of the pitfalls might have resonated. How do we avoid those as we move in it and build a more holistic approach? So great. Well, thanks everybody for sharing your perspective. And I think that really leads us perfectly to what we want to do next is, let's not have a theoretical or hypothetical conversation about this, but let's really jump into an example. And what we want to do is spend some time and jump into the Maersk story. And so I'm going to stop sharing, and we'll kind of switch modes here. But what I wanted to do was introduce Dr. Erez Agmoni, and we're going to have a conversation about the journey that he's been on and that Maersk has been on as they've gone through this. So Dr. Erez Agmoni is the Global Head of Innovation for Maersk, a role focused on taking customers' supply chains to the next level through radical thinking and innovation. So perfect, leaning right into this topic. He's based in New Jersey, as we talked about, and you see the background of New York City, where he heads up the Maersk Innovation Center. He stood up the team and has helped the team grow with a focus on their key pillars: R&D, digital innovation, and product innovation. And additionally, he invests his time in cultivating the Maersk innovation ecosystem that contains internal stakeholders, customers, academia, government and venture capital players. So really a wide network of folks building around the Innovation Center to help foster progress. So with that, first of all, thank you for joining us, Erez, for this conversation.
Thank you for having me. You took all the things that I wanted to share. Now there's nothing else to say. We can close the show.
I'm gonna have to probe with really good questions. That's great. So we'll dive in. I thought it would be helpful to just start with a little bit of context. So when we first met a few years ago, it was the fall of 2021, and you all had recently launched the Global Innovation Center supporting the North America business. But you're in the early stages, really kind of fine-tuning the innovation charter. Would love to hear a little bit of more from your perspective, that context for what was happening in the business at the time. Certainly COVID was going on, but also investment and growth in North America, and what prompted you all to see the importance and need for the Innovation Center.
Yeah, thanks for that question. Definitely, I think it's important to understand, as you kind of asked it, why we started, where did we start, what was the conditions at that time. Because only the right condition will allow you to kick off something like this and actually sustain it. During the time, we were already the team and myself were mainly focusing on our warehousing and distribution elements originally. And we already were by doing other roles, we actually did some proof of concept on the side, tried to innovate in a small scale as an extra job for the people beyond what they did. So it's already the business was already seeing that there is an ability to change. As you mentioned, COVID was there. Both the business and customers were desperate to look for different solutions and different ways to do things, to improve utilization, to improve the workflow of things, to improve all those elements and ensure that their goods are actually reaching on time to wherever they need to reach. And those small successes gave us enough leverage to start and basically ask, hey, let's formalize it and build that as a different team. That's the main focus. So I can say that yes, the business was booming at that time, COVID and normally disasters helping supply chain business to boom. It's not always just the money, but the movement of things, the new solutions that you need to actually looking for. But at the same time, it was done in a very old-fashioned way, a lot of manual type of work, a lot of things that needed to be changed. And there was no future in sight on how you're going to do it differently. That's where we came into the picture and said, okay, let us run it in certain way, which we started to design, and I'll talk about this in just a bit. We started to design how to do it and where to do it, and with the proven record of the small things that we did before, we got the mandate to actually start running it and then expand beyond what the scope we had.
And I think that's a great point too. So it's not, even as we talk about you're building around it, supporting the innovation system overall, but you had some early proof points. It started to gain momentum, and then you're leaning into that, and then you're building on that. And also some of the need was seen and recognized from folks to say, okay, let's lean into those wins. Let's make this bigger. Let's put more effort against this.
Yep.
That's great.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So using those, you can start in small ways or bigger ways and expand on it too. I love that. So, one of the things we talked a little bit about this idea of innovation performance and what are you aiming towards, as you think about, and this is something that I think probably resonates with a lot of folks thinking about innovation within large companies. As you think about the customers you're serving and who you're trying to bring value to, often there's the customer in the traditional sense, with you all thinking about the shippers, but the second group is your internal stakeholders whom you work really closely with. How do you think about driving innovation in support of both of those groups and the impact you're hoping to achieve?
So you definitely hit it on the nail. We have multiple customers, the internal stakeholders. Those are very important customers that you always have to keep in mind, because they can come up with multiple different problems that they see on their day-to-day operation, so we do source from them a lot of the problems that we're actually looking to solve. But of course, there is also the external customers. Those are the guys that coming to us and say, hey, I need you to improve my supply chain. I need you to improve the way we do things. We wanted better results from what we're getting today. How can you help us as a company? And that's where you need to bring both the internal stakeholders, but also the external one, to come together and try to kind of looking for the problem. So the methods that we are kind of utilizing is that we're sourcing the problems. We're starting with the problems, of course, right? We're not trying to innovate for the sake of innovation, or to use some technology because it's a cool name out there in the market. And you know what, let's force it into the business and see. We always start with the problem. What is it that we're trying to solve? Is it some automation that could solve it? Is it some digital that can solve it? We're kind of looking into what is that problem. We do a scouting, actually. We're starting our scouting for solutions. We're starting to design potential solution with whatever we think is available out there. If nothing is available, we go to the next level of either working with startups or with venture capitals to identify somebody that can build it for us. There's a very small amount of things that we say, you know what, this is, let's do it by ourselves. The problem with that is that you get a lot of the time conflict between customers' implementation and stuff like this. And those teams, IT and others, doesn't have the time to just spare to let's try to build new things. So that's where actually working with external resources is very helpful. So we're designing the solution. We kind of theoretically thinking what's going to be the ROI, if there is it about safety? So can we bring the safety element into the game? Is it about productivity change? So all this coming to in the design phase, and then we're actually starting to run those proof of concept. Now, proof of concept is not done in a lab out of a kind of environment which is not connected. It is, that's where it comes back to the question. We are running those proof of concept with our customers, with our internal stakeholders, and making sure that it's running in a live environment where we actually do the business on a real shipment. Of course, we're doing it in a certain way that it's either small scale enough that we can immediately roll back, or we can just shut it down and do the normal old way. So there is always a reverse way that we can go back to. So it's not going to impact the business. Now, if something is successful, great, it stays and we deploy it and we expand it. If it fails, it's basically go back to the research loop and start to find new solution. How can we actually do that?
Yeah, I love that. A couple of things sticking out to me. One, just really starting with the problem. So making sure that it's not just starting with the solution. Often failure mode is kind of falling in love with the solution versus the problem, and making sure that you're not force fitting a solution for where there isn't a problem or it doesn't feel that sticky. And then testing with the customer sooner rather than later. So making sure that you're not kind of believing a reality that isn't true, but really getting it out there to validate. The other thing that you said that stuck out to me was just this idea of how do you think about external partnerships, the interaction with the core? Where does it make sense not to distract the core business, make traction here? You might redecide things as things scale, but really thinking about kind of being a bit nimble, making sure that you can pursue things quickly. And sometimes that looks like bringing in other folks to partner with, and just being really judicious about what's the best path to start to test these things and validate. Which I love. You know, as you're talking about all these different ideas, it comes to, you know, how do we prioritize? What are we doing across so many different options? How did you guys think about this process of how do you narrow it down to what are the priority areas? How you filter to say this is worth pursuing and this is not, even if there is a problem and there's something worth going after, but there's a breadth of things that you could go do, and only so much time.
Definitely there is kind of a funnel for us, but it's not just a simple one step at a time. It's kind of a mesh funnel, I would say. I don't know what is equivalent to a real tool in life. But we first of all trying to understand, is the problem big enough, important enough?
Yeah.
Can we actually duplicate that solution to somewhere else?
Yeah.
You know, is it an isolated one place, one time problem, or is it something that will solve many different places? So, so the scalability is a super important element. It gives quite a lot of points to a solution when we identify or to a proof of concept we want to run. Of course, ROI, if there is an ROI, if it's safety, there is high points that you get for that, because, you know, life of people and or ensuring people are not getting hurt. This is definitely goes very high on the priority list. And if it's talking about any improvement to the work, then you should have an ROI, some kind of, and that's where we're starting to see, of course, the shorter ROI, the better priority it gets. Together with the multiplications of how many locations it can be go and install. And the other is the technology to solve that available right away, or do you need to kind of really take your time to? So we will start projects, and we do have projects that are actually long term. But it's super important for us to also run at the same time multiple projects that are shorter term, just because of most organization, including our organization, doesn't have the patience to wait until success will come in 3 years. You know, people want to say, okay, we spent so much money, what happened with this thing? You know, just presenting another presentation or another talk will not be enough. So can we digest or slice and dice this problem into multiple small projects? Very good, get more points. So it's kind of a multiple things that needs to come together. Can we get the support from the internal teams to run this proof of concept? So all those things have to come into together and actually create some metrics that telling us, you know what, this is one first priority, second, all these are in the bucket of the first priority. Let's go after them. And then kind of the rest falls behind.
So a set of criteria to filter. One, I was just seeing a question come up with early stage justification and ROI and any advice. And it's kind of interesting, you know, one, you talked about ROI is something that you consider, but one of the things that stuck out to me that you said was you're sort of looking at, is this an isolated problem? Is there greater need? You know, with that question, any advice? Sometimes ROI is tricky in the beginning when you don't have clarity, but you kind of where you're going, how do you create proof points that the market is there? So sometimes you're still trying to figure out your own solution to it and the business model around that. And that ROI can actually be less certain because there's a lot of assumptions that you're figuring out. But I think one thing to really lean into that you guys are doing and articulating in that is the problem widely held? Do we have conviction that that market is interesting? And then the next challenge is to say, can we go about and solve this problem both with a solution and in a profitable way?
So let's remember we have two sets of problems. Those internal problems, that's very easy to find out if the market, the internal market is there. We know what we have. It's easy to understand, do we have it in multiple locations or not? So that's relatively easy. Then you have those problems that are more customers related facing. That's where we actually working hand in hand with our commercial organization and say, hey guys, this is a problem we believe we heard from one or two customers. Can you figure it out if there are more customers with that problem? So we meet customers ourselves. We ask our commercials to do some work on our behalf, and we gather enough information from multiple customers to say, you know what, the problem exists. Now, can we solve for that? All right, does the market have solutions? Okay. Do we think we can develop a solution? So luckily that ecosystem that we build, so in our external part of things, we have our customers, we have academia, we work quite a lot with academia, MIT and multiple other universities that we kind of collaborating quite well on developing things and of course research as well.
Yeah.
Then we have government as another ecosystem partner where we learn from them on what exists in the different areas. They know quite a lot of things, especially when it comes to innovation. There's specific teams within state government and countries' governments, you know, and those type of connections helping us to understand what exists out there even faster. And then last but not least, we have all these startup and venture capitals that we are working with. And very fast nowadays, we can just spread a problem to the ecosystem of the startups and see if somebody's actually working on it or want to work on that and get answer and kind of, oh, it makes sense. Let's get them on board. So that's kind of how we're looking at those things.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, Alex, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, so
yeah,
and there's such great content and such great questions. And so let's rattle through a few of these because
great.
A lot of people are asking great things. So one, again, our friend Amol said, great summary, small innovation team. The strong supporters, though, are insisting that they pursue evolutionary projects rather than more of the strategic, revolutionary, but long-term projects. And so they're trying with their existing headcount to work this balance. They don't want to upset, you know, the supporters who want the incremental stuff, but they got to focus on strategic. To both of you, sort of quick, any magic bullets, you know, any silver bullets?
So from my perspective, the way we see it, and as kind of Anna alluded at the beginning, we're looking to kind of disturb the way we're doing things, to change it totally. We leave the evolutionary stuff to our CI teams, to our OpEx team, Operation Excellence. So there is a very important role for them in that elements to kind of slowly change and create things. Where we are seeing, sometimes you don't have the luxury to wait for the next 5 or 10 years to change something. You need to make it different now. But you can do that in a test case environment and then show that, proving that concept, show that it actually works and without disturbing the whole business. So there is ways to do disruption without disturbing, right? It's kind of sounds contradicting, but there is ways to do that. And we're in the fine balance of how to do that. And I think we kind of figure it out. Now, of course, you need to bring the whole organization to understand how to do that and how to support. So a lot of our operation teams, when we come with a solution that either customers ask or they ask, they're like, oh no, we kind of doing it for 30 years. Why would you want us to change now? So I won't tell you it's an easy things to do, but we kind of designed 2 things. One, we designed an executive educational program for our peoples in the different teams. And those basically are going into 4 different programs. So the first chapter, it's an online training by a few professors from MIT, just talking about change and how innovation is happening. The second is actually an immersing 3 days at MIT, where we're taking them to the different research that we collaborate on, hands-on different tools that we created. And the last half a day, we're sending them to see different robotics company or different things in the Boston area. It's quite a lot. A few weeks after that, we're sending them to Silicon Valley, where they meet startups and venture capitals, because the reason we introduced that is there's a lot of money, heavy amount of money is going from venture capitals to startup. It's not happening for no reason. There is a very good reasons why venture capital are investing. These guys are disturbing the way of working. And if we're not going to change, somebody will change with those technology. But we also want them to understand why it's happening, how these people are thinking out of the box. Last but not least, a few weeks after that, we bring them to the Innovation Center. We run 1 day of training on kind of how to pitch an idea, how to come up with an idea, how to look for solution. And then we do the second day, quick Shark Tank style competition between the teams. And those that are actually the top 3 places we're going to do a proof of concept that whatever they come up with the idea, we're going to help them and run the proof of concept with them. Now, by doing that, you gain few things, right? First of all, you train people, we get those type of mentality change, and you open their mind to new ideas. But you also get ambassadors all over the business that now, when they run proof of concept with you, their teams also get exposure to that, and you're starting to multiply. So it's not an easy task at the beginning, but it takes time, and you can actually shift the mentality a little bit towards, let's be open, let's try new things.
Yeah.
So it's a long answer to a short question, but I hope it makes sense.
I think that's great. I was just saying a couple things that I think that feeds into, but one, some of the upfront work in getting alignment with leadership on the strategic priorities, and then Erez, those things you talked about, continuing the communication and the stakeholder buy-in, really creating that champion group and making sure, especially at the most senior levels, that there's a right alignment and support. And then to the governance. So I do think this idea, this tension between where are we investing, what's the pull of things that are closer in, that is never going to stop. And so what we often think about is what's the right governance, and how do you make sure that you kind of have protection over it? And part of that comes from the leadership buy-in. Part of it is about getting the right folks to help defend and protect, funding and prioritization around those things. So that's a couple things that can reinforce those pieces.
And Erez, do you mind sharing real quickly just a little bit more about the innovation team? So a number of folks have asked what the size is, the structure, how long it's been around, and there's also a question about the reporting structure, sort of up to senior leadership. Could you just maybe spend a minute on that?
Yeah. So it's a relatively small team. It's less than 20 people. We're close to 20 actually. As I mentioned, or actually Anna mentioned before, we have three main pillars that the team is looking after. It's the automation and autonomous, it's the digital innovation, and it's the product innovation, where we're creating new products for the customers. Structurally, we started as a North America innovation team, where we reported basically to the regional head. And as of last year, we got a new mandate to be actually part of a global, so the mandate became global. And now we shifted to report basically to the head office, high level in the organization. So I think you need that kind of structure and position in the organization. That is important to ensure you have the right sponsorship. People need to understand that it's important for the company, that it's kind of open some doors, because there's always something that is not perfectly work, and you need some help from teams that are too busy. So you need people to help you to actually open those doors and ensure that that you can do those things that you need to do. Originally, we were sponsoring 100% of the proof of concept, so we got our own budget to sponsor that. Recently, we decided to change that, actually, to do a sharing sponsorship. We want the business to invest, because otherwise it's too easy for them to say yes and then say no. Yes, we like it, but you know what? Not much. They only invested a little bit of time. So we do kind of a sharing of the cost between the innovation center and between the business that actually asking for it, making sure that they will stay connected and willing to make it a success. So that's kind of we learned on the hard way. And it's okay. You're not going to be starting an innovation setup which all the answers in advance, right? You need to come up with a strategy, decide certain thing, and the rest you kind of learn as you move ahead, because each organization will work slightly different than the others. So it's not exactly the same everywhere.
It's interesting. I just saw somebody asking about just making sure things continue to move through the innovation process, and that idea of there are many ways to do it, but how do you make sure there's shared ownership or investment? The right stakeholders are engaged so that they'll continue to pull this through as it needs to get adopted. So that's I like that evolution.
Yeah. Now, I think one more important element here is that you're running a proof of concept or you're testing an idea. It's not good enough to be successful. Because there's so many successful projects that everybody, yeah, great job, and nothing happened. You know, it is very, very important to connect the innovation team to a deployment team that will work either underneath the innovation team or very close dotted line to the innovation team, and make sure that the deployment team stay connected with the innovation team for the first, in our world, we do it for the first 10 deployments, that we stay connected and ensuring the right handover of knowledge and capabilities and the mistakes that we did along the way, and until they learn how to actually run it, and then you can let go. I saw many innovation teams that saying, okay, yeah, we success, business, please take it over, and then boom, it's failed. So remember that staying connected until you have, it's helping, first of all, to actually have it on the ground, but it's also helping from internal PR, right? When you're starting to push it and it's actually running and working, more and more people learning about this, because now there's become a word of mouth, and they hear about the success and they are, oh, we want that too. We also want this, you know, and that's kind of helping the snowball rolling and growing, actually.
We've got so many great questions, but I think, Anna, if you want to proceed a little bit for some of the remaining points, I'm going to encourage all of you to continue to submit them via the chat and Q&A. I'll submit the link for our Ask Us Anything call, which we'll have in about a week, so we can talk about some more things. We'll definitely address more of your questions now, but yeah, Anna, you want to touch on a couple additional topics before we hit?
Yeah, we've covered a lot of the different components as we've been jumping around, which has been great. One of the things I wanted to come to was a little bit of the innovation process. So we talked about a little bit proof of concept, getting it pulled into the business. What are some other things that you've learned? We talked about, you know, the new and different can't be developed in the same way that the core is developing new ideas. What were some of the learnings that you all had early on about how you needed to create that innovation pathway or process to make sure that you're getting more traction, that you're moving things through that funnel?
So I think here it's basically our main starting point was, how do we prove things that we can actually change them in a very fast way? So we initially took only projects that we knew that will be very quick to solve, just to show people that actually there is a success story behind here. You don't want to start with something that takes forever, right? That's kind of something that you already kind of okay, stuck there. So we took few projects that we knew that were going to be a quick turnaround. We deployed them. We didn't know if they would be a success, but we knew that the yes or no will be very quick, and if yes, that's going to be starting to be deployed. So that was few multiple robotic solution in warehouses. And then we started to take stuff that are slightly taking longer term. For example, a good example to that will be, we had a problem to solve on how to identify how long it takes to unload containers in a manual fashion. So there's some complexity in just come up with simple calculation. It's the amount of cartons inside, it's the amount of splits to how many destination it's going to go. So it's kind of and that's a problem that started with the continuous improvement team. They came to us and say, oh, we're struggling with that. And we were like, sounds like a very easy problem. Why? What's the problem? Let's help you with an Excel. We thought we're going to do it with Excel. So we definitely realized that they're smart enough to try the Excel, and we didn't understand the problem, and that didn't work. Then that's kind of also a good case of how we failed few times until we succeed. Then we try to use a labor management system, LMS, but there's no scanning, so there's no input into any system, and we failed there as well. We put tablets and told people just check in, check out when you work and you leave the area. Nobody want to do it, no cooperation. Even we try to force, they kind of, why you monitoring me? And it was, nothing came into that, failed again. Then we kind of looked into, okay, let's develop something that will take us a little bit longer time, but there's a much higher potential for success. It was computer vision. So we put cameras outside the containers doors. And we started with the machine learning to basically monitor, after tens of thousands of containers that we looked into, how many people are there, what do they do, how do they do things, what's the depth into the container already completed, are they doing manually, are they doing with the forklift, are they doing with the cart? And the machine learning started to predict how long it will take to actually finish a container before it started. So today we're at slightly above 80% accuracy.
Wow.
We don't think that we will ever go anything beyond that because there's so many unknowns there that, you know, it's going to be too difficult to make it happen. But that actually allowed us to tap into multiple things. One, we can incentivize the people if they do better.
Yep.
Before, you cannot do that because you have no clue what is supposed to be.
Yeah.
Yeah. The second thing is now we can connect that system to multiple other things and improve the flow of the building altogether, right? Because when you're finishing a container, normally what happens is a person needs to go and say, okay, finish that container. Then somebody in the radio call the drivers, can you go and pick up this container, the empty container, and can you put a new one in that door? Now this can all be synchronized. The system say in 10 minutes, these guys will finish it. Go and call the drivers to pick it up in 10 minutes. Be sure that, you know, of course, with the safety and everything. So now you're actually taking it further from what's originally intended.
Yep.
So it's very important to kind of take, first of all, when you really early start, take very short projects, something that you can show that this whole idea is going the right direction, and then start to top of it on it multiple longer term things that can actually even be bigger than what you're solving. So that's kind of one approach that we took.
Well, and I love it. I'll come back to this idea of, you talked about kind of really anchoring on the problem, and you had such clarity about what are we trying to solve for. Then you experimented. You know, I almost think about this innovation process as it's not linear. There's a lot of rotation around, try one thing, try the next thing. But when you have this conviction that we understand the problem, it's our job to iterate and kill and find the right solution. So I really love that example of kind of the realities. And the other thing, I just wrote down the word pragmatic. Like, I love, as you're talking through this, just a very pragmatic approach to, there are all these, we're balancing different stakeholder demands. We're balancing how do we gain traction, and there are all these important pieces to put into place, but this kind of pragmatism about balancing between the short term and the long term, getting stakeholders involved, having some skin in the game, kind of just those sorts of things that I think you've really done a nice job, and just it's resonating with me around how do you actually walk through this in practice, and you're balancing a lot of those things, and they're tricky things to walk through, and it's art and science in terms of doing it, which is great. Maybe I'll just ask one more question. But just as you've been growing the team, so some folks on the on calling in, I'm sure, are at different, as we saw the poll, some in very early stages. You've thought about kind of thinking about the location, bringing in different capabilities, pulling from the business to make sure there's continuity. What are some of the things that you've thought about as you've continued to expand the team and build on the build with the great folks that you have?
Yeah, so I think the number one importance when you build a team is the diversity. And diversity from all different aspects, right? Gender diversity is super important. Background diversity is very important. You don't want just the same type of knowledge that people bring. You want people to come from different type of backgrounds, works. Some of our engineers, other will be finance people, other will be business people. So you really have all those type of things. And other elements that we kind of choose to do is to spread people, not to force them to be in one location. We definitely wanted by design to have people all over the place when we give service. So right now the team is in North America, but we're starting now to build it in the other regions. But in North America, it will be all over the place. So we are actually close to the business where the work is actually being done. It's important because if you sit totally isolated and never see the business, you're losing those connections. You're losing those understanding what actually is the problem. But at the same time, you also need one isolated place when you need it to be different, that's where this innovation center is actually exists. It's to be when you need to kind of brainstorm with customers or to brainstorm with startups, and you don't want the day-to-day to disturb you. So you also have one location that is actually sit outside of this hall, and you can bring the people in. So that's kind of how we design it, and it so far it works quite successfully from that perspective.
Yeah, it's interesting. We talk about kind of what's the right level of separation versus integration, and another thing where it's a balancing act. And I like this idea of kind of protecting both of those pieces. Both, how does the team know the business? It's not so disconnected that there isn't that that reality check of, do we deeply understand the problems, but also that they're not just completely getting absorbed into the core. How do we create right separation and lean into the ecosystem that you've created as well? So I love both of those pieces. One, Alex, I'll just check with you. I know other questions have come in, and just watching the time if we want to ask any of those additional ones.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch, and I've been sharing the Ask Us Anything call link. So please do sign up for that, because we'll keep the conversation going in more of a Zoom meeting format. But I think just to, again, double click, and maybe Erez, you can share a little bit more around, Anna, the word that pragmatic or pragmatism.
Yeah.
I mean, there's just so much about how do you buy the time, the space, the trust, the support to do what you need to do that isn't going to generate evidence right away of return. I mean, that's what it's all about, right? And so in an innovation role I was in once, the leader said, we shouldn't be talking to the core business. We don't want to get sucked in. They should be afraid of us, like, don't get involved. Practically speaking, you almost should do a lot to help them out, particularly if you need those stakeholders to support you, right? So there's just this practical stuff, and I know you guys at Innosight do a lot about. Erez, can you just share a little bit more about how you build and maintain that, at the equivalent level, or that senior leadership support for what you're all trying to do, when there's a whole bunch of belief and it's going to happen? How do you do that?
So I think I kind of alluded earlier, one of the elements is that executive education. We started actually with the top level of executives. That was the first time we ran it. That was about 2 years ago. Last year, we actually ran 2 cohorts where we went down one level. It's still leaders and people that managing things, but one level below that, and we intend this year to run another 2 cohorts with more people. So that's definitely helps you to get a buy-in, to understand what you do. The other element is, of course, those proof of concept that you design. You have to design them, as I mentioned. You start with something that is short, that you can return a solution. You build a solution relatively fast. You can even return an investment relatively fast. But you do that, of course, with the business, with the leaders. You're not disconnecting for them and tell them, no, we're going to disturb you. You should not work with us, etc. You're not trying to change everything at once. You're trying to change one element in a big way to kind of help them to see that those things actually can lead to a better for them to work with you, because everybody is under pressure to improve their performance every year, year over year, to reduce their cost year over year, and to make more money, right? It's normal for any corporation to ask this, and they hit walls at the end of the day. They're coming with the 2%, 3%, and they kind of, okay, we'll find out how to do it. They have no clue. Now you're coming to them and say, I can help you with 30%. Or with 40% or with 20%, why not? Give it a try, So you actually show them that you're going to help them rather than to yourself, because we are not measured by that. We are measured by the success and amount of places, but not exactly the amount of money that we generate. They get the benefit of that money, so it's actually they get the buying through that, and of course you need to be successful at least few times at the beginning. It's okay to fail, but if you fail fast. Don't push it again and again and again, because sometimes we see people that, hey, no, it doesn't work, but let's insist, let's try harder in the same solution. If it's failed, what else you can do to make it success? What else? If nothing, move on. Especially in the beginning when things are very critical.
Erez, thank you so much for that. So everybody's joining us, please continue to submit questions in the Q&A feature in the chat, and then we'll follow up with you afterwards, because you've got a lot of great questions, and we've got that Ask Us Anything call as well. Anna and Erez, let's take the last couple minutes. And if you want to say some concluding remarks, Erez, you as well. And then again, to everybody who's joined us, thank you. And we'll follow up to make sure you get your questions answered.
Yeah, that's great. I was just reflecting on just the arc of the conversation and just going back to, put things on your wall that remind you of the case for change and really, kind of, this is not easy. It's very hard to do things differently, but the need is so great. And then don't do it in a vacuum. Don't do one-offs. Like think about creating all the different components that set things up for success. I think that thread is so important to stick to. And then I just love where this conversation has gone. As you lean into it, as you set up those things for success, keep a very pragmatic hat. There are all these tensions that exist. Walking through those carefully and just understanding them, and thinking about this tightrope, I think that's a lot of what the day-to-day success comes down to too, as you're really grappling with it. So that's what's really standing out for me, as I reflect on this discussion. Erez, I'll turn it over to you.
I will just bring one more time the sponsorship. Don't start it if you don't have the right sponsorship. Even if you think you're going to be super successful, you can do it on the side, but don't take it as a full mission if you don't have a sponsorship, because the chance for you to success without sponsorship is very low. You need that high-level sponsorship. You need people to be able to understand what you're doing is important to the business. So get that sponsorship, and only then embark on full-scale innovation. If you don't have that sponsorship, continue to do on the side until you kind of as a side job, until you gain that element of trust from the organization and they see the importance of that. Because otherwise, the frustration will come very, very fast, and either they close it down or you decide to leave, and so it's not going to make any sense. So I think remember that. I think it's an important.
And in the end, I mean, is that maybe that's what you would say? I mean, ultimately, we've got folks in the chat who've talked about people enamored with their own solutions, all kinds of resistance. We, earlier that whole push to focus on the core. In the end, is that senior leadership sponsorship? I mean, in the end, for you, would you say, if you have it, these things are possible, and if you don't, not much else you can do?
Yep. Absolutely. Even to run what we talked about, the executive education, you won't be able to get funding for that if you don't have the right sponsorship. Who's going to find that, right? It's everything you do needs, if you want to open the door for the change of mind, you need a sponsorship. If you want to get the right funds, sponsorship. If you want somebody to listen to you, sponsorship. It's all tied back together. So I think this is a super important key.
Yeah, and as our friend Nat just showed in the chat, sponsorship/leadership changes is a big risk, right? So in the end, system, and as you said, is so important to put in place. That governance is crucial. And then at the top, how can you ensure you can withstand? You can have stability when you have turnover at the top, because you don't want it to be like the Etch-a-Sketch, where suddenly the new leader comes in and they just shake it all up again and say brand new system and new team, and
absolutely.
A big problem.
And I think I saw that somebody, probably Nat, was talking about leadership changes is a risk. Yes, it's absolutely a risk, because suddenly people that sponsor you gone. But that's where I think if you get the sponsorship for the first 2 years, 3 years, whatever, the beginning, until you kick in stuff and you prove that what you're doing is actually bringing value back to the business. That's why it's also important to take those short projects at the beginning and then start to kick those longer projects. Then the sponsorship is still important, but there is easier to get a new sponsorship if something changed over there.
Yeah.
It's great. Well, thank you so much. We're just about at the top of the hour. So Anna and Erez, really appreciate all the insights you shared. Everybody who's joined us, thank you so much. Great questions in the Q&A, great questions and thoughts in the chat. We've captured it all. We're going to follow up and answer it. I've also shared the link to our Ask Us Anything conversation we're going to have on the 26th. It'll be a Zoom meeting, so we can all be up on camera, and let's just kind of work through these things. And Erez has been kind enough, and Anna as well, to offer up some time to answer the questions. So we'll follow up with the replay and the slides. Please reach out to any of us if you have any further questions. We thank you all for joining. I hope you have a wonderful day. And Anna and Erez, thank you again so much to both of you.
I found this incredibly energizing, so thank you for having us too.
Bye.